Jack sat there, still trying to process what had just happened. The ringing in his ears slowly faded, and the adrenaline began to settle. He had narrowly escaped death, but he wasn't sure who had saved him or why. He glanced at Emma, who was still crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the room with a calm that felt almost unnatural. The tension in the air was thick, but Emma didn't flinch. She was already moving, her hand on Jack's shoulder, urging him to stay low. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay down. We're not out of the woods yet." Jack nodded, still in shock. He wanted to ask her questions, wanted to know how she had known what to do, why she had reacted so quickly. But there was no time for that now. Emma was already on her feet, moving with purpose. She scanned the restaurant, her eyes darting from one corner to the next, as if searching for something. "Who was that?" Jack finally asked, his voice hoarse. Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved toward the far corner of the room, her eyes focused. She moved like she was on a mission, like she knew exactly what to do next. "It doesn't matter who they were," she replied, her voice cold. "What matters is that you're safe." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You need to trust me, Jack. There's a lot you don't know." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Trust her? He didn't even know her last name. But in that moment, something in his gut told him that Emma was the only person who could get him through this. "What's going on? Who's after me?" he asked, his voice rising with frustration. Emma didn't flinch at his tone. She was calm, collected, like she had dealt with situations like this 1,000 times before. "I'll explain everything later," she said, glancing at the door. "But right now, we need to move. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to take you down." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Emma was already pulling him toward the back exit. He didn't have time to argue. He had been in plenty of dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. Emma was the only one who seemed to have a plan. He followed her. Through the kitchen, the sounds of chaos growing fainter with each step they took. "I'm not leaving without answers," Jack said, his frustration mounting. Emma shot him a look over her shoulder, her expression hardening. "You'll get them, but not yet," she said. "Right now, we're focused on keeping you alive." They reached the back door, and Emma quickly pulled it open, scanning the alley outside. The streetlights flickered in the distance, but the alley was empty. For a moment, everything seemed eerily still. Emma pulled Jack out into the night, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Stay close," she said. "We don't have much time." Jack could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't know what Emma was hiding, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't safe until he understood what was really going on. Emma pulled Jack into the shadows of the alley, her grip never loosening on his arm. The night air was cold, sharp against their skin, but it didn't seem to matter. Emma's focus was razor-sharp, every muscle in her body taut, as if she were ready for anything. Jack, on the other hand, was still in a daze, trying to process everything that had happened. He had lived through more than his fair share of dangerous situations, boardroom deals, hostile takeovers, even a few close calls in the field, but this was different. He wasn't in control, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was on top of things. "Where are we going?" Jack finally asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I need to know what's going on." Emma didn't answer immediately, but he could see the way her eyes flickered around, scanning the alley as if expecting someone to jump out from behind a dumpster. "We're going to a safe house," she said, her voice low. "A place where we can regroup. I'll explain everything, but right now, we need to move fast. The people who are after you, they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors, whispers in the industry about corporate espionage and power plays, but this felt like something far darker. "Who are they?" he asked. Emma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Not yet," she replied. "I can't tell you everything until we're safe." Jack wanted to argue, but something in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't just trying to protect him. She was trying to protect both of them. As they walked through the dark alley, Jack couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Emma moved. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even looking over her shoulder. She was confident, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. And maybe she had. But Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to Emma than she was letting on. "You said you'd explain," he pressed. "You've already saved my life twice now. I deserve to know why." Emma stopped and turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made Jack pause. "I'm not here to be your protector, Jack," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I have my own reasons for being involved. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you're still alive." Jack took a deep breath, frustration bubbling inside him. "You're not telling me everything," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Emma didn't flinch. She just stared at him for a moment before turning and walking towards the end of the alley. "And you don't need to know everything," she said over her shoulder. "Not yet." Jack followed her, knowing he had no other choice. They were in this together now, whether he liked it or not. They reached the end of the alley, where a black SUV was parked under the dim glow of a streetlight. Emma opened the door, motioning for Jack to get inside. "Get in," she said. Jack hesitated for a second before climbing into the back seat. Emma slid in beside him, her eyes never leaving the street as the driver started the engine. Jack leaned back in his seat, trying to steady his breathing. The events of the night were crashing down on him, and the questions in his mind only seemed to grow. Who was trying to kill him? Why had Emma been there to save him? And what was her connection to all of this? He didn't have answers, but one thing was clear: Emma wasn't just a waitress. And whatever was coming next, he had to trust her. For better or worse, she was his only chance at survival. The SUV's engine hummed softly as it glided through the quiet streets of Manhattan. The city was still awake, but the noise of the bustling streets felt distant now. Jack sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his mind racing with questions that only seemed to pile up as the night went on. Emma sat beside him, her posture as calm as ever, her eyes alert as she scanned the road ahead. The silence between them was thick, the kind of silence that felt both comfortable and uneasy at the same time. Jack wanted to ask her everything, but he didn't know where to start. She had already saved his life, twice, but there was still so much he didn't understand. What was her story? Why was she involved in all of this? And who was behind the attempt on his life? He glanced at her, noticing the way she held herself, the quiet confidence that seemed to come naturally to her. She wasn't the typical waitress, that was clear. She was something else. "How long have you been doing this?" Jack finally asked, his voice low. Emma didn't look at him. "Doing what?" she replied, her tone neutral. "Saving people," Jack said, the words feeling heavy in the air. "You've been saving me. You saved me back there." "What?" Emma's gaze flickered to him for a split second before returning to the street. "I don't do it for you, Jack," she said quietly. "I do it because I have my own reasons. I'm not your hero. I'm not here to protect you. I'm here because I have my own fight." Jack felt a strange twist in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was disappointment or something else. He had expected some kind of explanation, a reason for her involvement. But there was no warmth in her response, no sign of compassion, just determination. "What fight?" Jack pressed. "What do you mean?" Emma's lips tightened, and for a moment, Jack thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she spoke, her voice even softer now. "You don't need to know. Not yet." She paused. "But I'll tell you this much. There's more at play here than just you. It's bigger than you think." Jack's mind raced. He had known, deep down, that there was more to this than a simple assassination attempt. But now he was even more certain. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting him. They were targeting something else. "But what? Are you trying to tell me that I'm just a part of something bigger?" Jack asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. Emma turned to him, her eyes locking onto his for the first time since they'd gotten into the car. There was something unreadable in her gaze, something that made him feel like she knew far more than she was letting on. "Everyone's a part of something bigger, Jack. Whether they know it or not," she said, her voice steady. Jack swallowed, trying to absorb her words. He wasn't used to being in the dark, especially when it came to his own life. He had spent years building his empire, making calculated decisions, and always being in control. But now, everything fell out of his hands. The car took a sharp turn, and Jack's attention snapped back to the present. They were no longer in the heart of the city, and the streets were quieter now, the buildings taller and more industrial. Emma's hand never left the grip of her phone, and Jack could tell she was coordinating something, but he didn't know what. "Where are we going?" he asked again, a hint of urgency creeping into his voice. Emma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Somewhere safe," she said simply. "Somewhere you'll be able to think. And where we can figure out who's really after you." Jack leaned back in his seat, trying to clear his mind. Safe. The word felt hollow now. There was no such thing as safe anymore, not when you had enemies lurking in the shadows. But he had no choice but to trust her. For now, she was his only chance at survival. The SUV came to a slow stop in front of a nondescript building, its dark exterior blending seamlessly with the night. The area felt distant, almost forgotten by the rest of the city. Jack glanced out the window, his mind still buzzing with questions. He could see the faint outline of a street lamp nearby, casting long shadows down the quiet street. Emma was already opening the door, her movements precise and deliberate. "This is it," she said, her voice low, but there was something about it that commanded attention. Jack hesitated, his fingers tightening around the armrest. "This is where we hide out?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emma didn't respond immediately. She stepped out of the SUV and closed the door with a soft click. Jack followed her, the cool air hitting his skin as he stepped onto the sidewalk. He felt exposed in a way he never had before, but he had no choice but to follow. "Come on," Emma called over her shoulder as she walked toward the building's entrance. Jack reluctantly followed her, his eyes scanning the street one last time, making sure they weren't being followed. The building was tall, industrial-looking, and had an eerie silence to it. Emma reached the door and typed in a code, the soft beeping echoing through the night. The door clicked open, and she stepped inside without looking back. Jack stood there for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew one thing. This was his only shot at survival. He stepped inside, and the door shut behind him with a quiet thud. The inside of the building was just as sterile as the outside. Gray walls, high ceilings, and minimal lighting. Emma was already a few steps ahead, walking briskly toward an elevator at the end of the hall. Jack quickened his pace to catch up, his shoes echoing on the concrete floor. "What is this place?" he asked again, the questions flooding back. "A safe house," Emma replied without turning around. "For people who need to disappear for a while." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You've got a lot of people who need to disappear?" Emma pressed the button for the elevator, the light flickering on as the door slid open. "More than you'd think," she said, stepping inside. Jack followed her, the door closing behind them. The elevator ride was brief, but Jack could feel the weight of the silence. He was so used to being in control of every situation, but here, in this quiet building, everything felt different. He felt small, vulnerable. The elevator finally came to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal a hallway that looked even more empty than the one below. Emma led the way down the hall, her footsteps light and measured. She stopped at a door near the end of the corridor and swiped a card through a reader. The door clicked open, revealing a small but comfortable-looking room. Jack stepped inside, his eyes scanning the space. It was a simple room, with a bed, a desk, and a small bathroom. But it was clean and functional, exactly what he needed right now. Emma moved to the desk and turned on the lamp. "This will be your room for the next few days," she said, her tone businesslike. "You can rest, think, and figure out your next move." Jack didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure what to think about all of this. But one thing was clear, Emma wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had connections, someone who knew how to navigate a world he didn't understand. "I need answers," Jack said finally, his voice low. "I need to know who's behind all this. And I need to know why you're helping me." Emma looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the door and paused before turning back to him. "Rest first," she said. "We'll talk later." With that, she left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. Jack stood there for a moment, the silence settling in around him. He felt trapped, isolated, but there was no way out. He sank down onto the bed, his mind racing with everything he didn't know. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. He had to trust Emma. She was the only one who had the answers. For now, that had to be enough. Jack woke up to the sound of soft footsteps outside his door. For a moment, he lay still, trying to make sense of the haze in his mind. The room was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of what had happened the night before pressed down on him. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, the feeling of disorientation creeping in. The events were surreal. Emma saving his life, the mysterious building, the strange safety that now surrounded him. Everything felt like a blur, yet every detail was vivid. He needed answers. He needed to understand why he was here, why he couldn't shake the feeling that he was part of something much bigger than himself. The door creaked open just as he was about to stand. Emma walked in, her face impassive as always, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "You look like you've had better mornings," she said with a small, almost imperceptible smile. Jack didn't return the smile. He wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "What's going on, Emma?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it now. "Why are you helping me? Who are these people who want me dead?" Emma didn't immediately respond. She walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room and placed a folder on it. "You'll get your answers," she said, her tone flat. "But first, you need to understand something. This isn't just about you. It never was." Jack's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "It means you've become a target because of what you're involved in," she said quietly. "What you're building. The empire you've been creating. It's made you a threat." Jack stood up, his pulse quickening. "A threat? To who?" Emma's expression hardened slightly. "To people who don't like competition. To people who think they can control everything. And they don't want you standing in their way." Jack felt a surge of frustration rise in his chest. He had spent years carefully constructing his company, making strategic moves, ensuring his success. But now, it felt like everything he'd worked for was being questioned, like he had unknowingly crossed a line. "And you're part of this?" he asked, his voice low, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Emma didn't flinch. "I'm part of something, yes," she said, her eyes flickering briefly. "But not in the way you think. I'm not your enemy, Jack. I'm trying to keep you alive so you can fight back." Jack's mind was reeling. He wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but he knew better. He had no leverage, no way of knowing what Emma was really up to. He had to trust her, at least for now. "Who are they, Emma?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Who wants me dead?" Emma didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the desk, picking up the folder she had placed there earlier. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Concern, maybe? She opened the folder, revealing a set of documents, photographs, and names. Jack moved toward her, his curiosity piqued. The documents were detailed, more than he had ever seen on a client or potential business partner. There were names he recognized, people in power, high-profile figures who would never want to be linked to something as messy as this. "These are the people who've been pulling the strings," Emma said, pointing to the photos. "The ones who are trying to control everything. You've been a pawn in their game, Jack. But now, they've decided you're too much of a risk." Jack stared at the photographs, his mind struggling to make sense of it all. "Why haven't I heard of them?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because they stay hidden," Emma replied. "They don't want to be noticed. They pull the strings from the shadows." Jack took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "What now?" he asked. Emma looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing her options. "Now," she said slowly, "we find out who's behind this, and we take them down. But first, you need to prepare. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But you need to be ready." Jack nodded, the weight of the situation settling in. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for everything he had built, everything he had worked for. And with Emma by his side, he had a chance to take control of his own future. But the road ahead was uncertain, and he knew he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The room felt smaller now. Jack sat in front of the desk, the weight of Emma's words still pressing down on him. They were at a crossroads. The next steps were crucial. Emma had told him they needed to prepare, but she hadn't said exactly how. She had left him alone in the room for a while, perhaps to give him space, perhaps to let him process everything. The folder she had shown him was now closed on the desk in front of him. The faces in the photographs lingered in his mind, each one an unsettling reminder of how deep the web ran. Jack knew his life would never be the same. The security he had once taken for granted was now shattered. Whoever these people were, they had power, and power meant control. They could destroy everything he had worked for. And that thought stirred something inside him, a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Emma walked in, her usual calm demeanor in place. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You ready?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Jack stood up slowly, nodding. "Yeah, let's do this." Emma walked over to the desk, picking up the folder and flipping through the documents. We have a few things to take care of, she said. First, you need to disappear. We have to make it look like you've gone off the radar. You can't be found, not by your enemies, not by anyone. Jack's heart sank. He hadn't expected to hear those words. Disappear? He asked, his voice low. Emma didn't flinch. It's the only way. We need to make it seem like you're out of the picture for good. The less attention on you, the better. We're going to need a fake identity, a new life. Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Emma cut him off. You don't have a choice, Jack. Not if you want to stay alive. She paused, her eyes meeting his. I know it's hard, but it's the only option. We've been dealing with people who don't hesitate to erase anyone who stands in their way. Jack took a deep breath, the reality of the situation settling in. He had always thought he was untouchable. He had built his empire from the ground up, made connections, and climbed to the top of the business world. But now, he was just a target, a pawn in a game far bigger than he could have imagined. He wasn't sure how to feel about it, but one thing was clear, Emma was right. He had to disappear. What do we do first? Jack asked, his voice steady. Emma looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. We start by getting you out of here. We have a place set up, somewhere remote, secure. It's not permanent, but it'll give us time to figure out our next move. She paused, as if considering something. I need you to trust me, Jack. I'm not asking for your trust in the long run, just enough to get through this. Jack nodded slowly. He didn't know if he could trust her completely, but right now, she was the only one who seemed to know what to do. She had saved his life, twice. For now, that was enough. Let's go, he said, his voice firm. Emma gave a small nod and turned to leave. Jack followed her out of the room, his mind still racing with questions. What would his life look like now? How long would they have to stay hidden? And most importantly, who were the people behind all of this? But for now, those questions would have to wait. Emma had a plan. It was the only plan he had, and he had to trust her to get him through this. The drive was long and silent. Jack could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier with every mile they covered. Emma sat beside him, her face unreadable as she focused on the road. The world outside the car window was a blur of streetlights and darkened buildings, but Jack's mind was far from the peaceful rhythm of the drive. He was processing everything that had led to this moment. His company, his wealth, the life he had built. All of it now seemed insignificant in comparison to the people who were hunting him. The road stretched ahead, empty and unending. Jack's thoughts were interrupted by Emma's voice, breaking the silence that had settled between them. We're almost there, she said, her tone neutral. Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure if she was speaking to reassure him or herself. He glanced at her, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. How did you get involved in all of this? Jack asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. Emma didn't immediately respond. She didn't even look at him. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the engine and the distant sound of the tires against the road. Jack wasn't sure if she had heard him or if she was just choosing not to answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I've been involved for longer than you think, she said, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. A lot longer. Jack didn't push further. He could sense that this wasn't the time for more questions. Emma had made it clear that she wasn't ready to share everything, and he wasn't about to press her. Besides, there was something in her voice that made him feel like he didn't want to know all of the details. Some things were better left unsaid. So what now? Jack asked after a few moments. Now we wait, Emma replied. We lay low for a while, keep off the radar. They'll be looking for you, and the last thing we want is for them to find us too soon. Jack let out a slow breath. And then we take the next step, she said, her voice firming up with resolve. We figure out who's behind this and why, and we make sure they never get what they want. Jack's gaze shifted to the horizon, the lights of the city flickering in the distance. He wasn't used to feeling this small, this powerless, but there was a part of him that knew Emma was right. He had no choice but to trust her, for better or worse. They were in this together now. The car eventually slowed, turning onto a narrow, quiet street. The buildings were older here, their brick facades weathered by time, but the area was peaceful, almost deserted. Emma pulled into a small parking lot at the end of the street, near an unassuming door tucked between two buildings. She parked the car and turned to Jack, her eyes meeting his. This is it, she said. You'll be safe here for now. No one knows about this place. It's off the grid. Jack looked around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. He had to admit, the place felt secure, isolated, even. But the thought of staying here, hidden away like some fugitive, unsettled him. How long? He asked. Emma shrugged slightly. As long as it takes. We'll move when the time's right. Jack hesitated, his eyes lingering on her face. And you? He asked. What's next for you? Emma met his gaze and gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. I'll be fine. I always am. Jack wasn't convinced. He didn't know her well, but he could see the signs. There was more to her than just a waitress. More to this entire situation than he could fully grasp. But for now, all he could do was follow her lead. Jack got out of the car and followed Emma toward the door. He had no idea what the next step was, or how long they would be hiding out here. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The storm that was coming was going to change everything. And Jack was going to have to be ready. He had no other choice. The door closed softly behind them as Emma led Jack into the small, dimly lit room. It was nothing fancy, just a few pieces of simple furniture, a bed, and a desk against one wall. The room had a bare, utilitarian feel, but to Jack, it felt like a fortress. The walls were thick, the air still, and outside, the world seemed a million miles away. Jack exhaled deeply, trying to relax, but the weight of the situation was still too heavy on his chest. He hadn't realized how badly he needed a break until now. He sat down on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. What now? He asked, his voice tired. Now we wait, Emma said, her voice calm and measured. We've set up a few things. We need to make sure no one knows where you are. For the next few days, you stay here. Don't leave the room unless I'm with you. We're not taking any chances. Jack nodded slowly, taking in her words. He knew she was right. The stakes were too high. But still, the idea of being locked away like this didn't sit well with him. And then, he asked, what happens after that? Emma glanced at him, her expression hardening. We find out who's behind all of this, she said, her voice low. And we make them regret it. Jack didn't know if she was speaking metaphorically or if she actually meant it. Either way, there was no doubt in his mind that Emma had a plan, and whatever it was going to be risky. I need to know more, Jack said, his tone insistent. I can't just sit here and wait. You know more than you're telling me. What are we really up against? Emma hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the desk. She opened one of the drawers and pulled out a folder. It was the same one she had shown him earlier, the one with the names and photographs. She placed it on the desk in front of him. This is who we're up against, she said quietly. Jack moved to the desk and opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. The faces of powerful people, people Jack had seen on television, in magazines, in the business world, stared back at him. He recognized some of them, and the realization sent a chill down his spine. These people, they're all connected, he muttered. They've been planning this for a long time. Emma nodded, her eyes dark. They've been playing the long game, Jack. You were just a pawn in their eyes, but now, they see you as a threat. Jack closed the folder slowly, his mind racing. So what now? We expose them. Not yet, Emma said, her voice firm. We need to be smart about this. We can't just go in guns blazing. We need to gather information, figure out who's pulling the strings. Once we know who's at the top, we'll have the leverage we need. Jack leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. And how long will this take? Emma's expression softened slightly. As long as it needs to. But we can't afford to rush. One wrong move, and it's over. Jack took a deep breath, nodding slowly. He wasn't used to waiting, but he didn't have a choice. He had to trust Emma. She had already proven she knew what she was doing. Okay, he said finally. I'll wait. But I need to know something. Why me? Why are you involved in all of this? Emma's eyes darkened, but she didn't respond right away. She crossed the room and stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. I have my reasons, she said quietly. I don't do this for you, Jack. I do it for myself. Jack was about to ask her more, but he stopped himself. He could see the finality in her posture, the way she held herself, as though she wasn't willing to share any more just yet. And for now, that was fine. He had enough on his plate. All right, Jack said, standing up and walking toward the door. I'll be in touch. Just don't let your guard down. We're not done yet. Emma's gaze never left the window, but she gave a small nod. I'll be ready when you are. Jack turned and walked out, the door clicking shut softly behind him. The quiet of the room was all-encompassing, but Jack's mind was anything but still. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the real game was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to be the pawn. He was going to take control. The storm was far from over.